All right, we ready? Fantastic. Hi there, guys. Real quick, I'm going to give a book talk about collapse, although I want to give a shout out to another book. I actually read this one before I read this. Germs, Gun, and Steel. Jared Diamond kind of got famous for this book, and those three things he thinks have explained why we have winners and losers throughout world history, right? The invention of guns and weapons, how germs have really harmed people, and certain people have won out and lost, and steel, right? Just for not only for attacking people, but for building. But the book I'm going to highlight is Collapse. Jared Steele looks at how have societies either succeeded or failed in history, right? And so I'm sure anytime we look at ancient histories, it's always because they're not around anymore. And why did they collapse? And he then looks at the U.S., right? So he thinks there's a series of factors that have to exist for society to be close to collapse, right? And so he looks at, is the United States heading there, or are we going to thrive and succeed? Because some civilizations have existed for thousands of years, and some not so much. Let me read you a brief passage to give you a feel for what he's talking about. This is probably the most the thickest book, if you kind of get what I mean by that, that I brought to you thus far. So this guy, this is a little bit more of a hefty read. But here we go. Those past collapses tended to follow somewhat similar courses, constituting variations on a theme. Population growth forced people to adopt intensified means of agricultural production, such as irrigation, double cropping, or terracing, and to expand farming from prime lands chosen onto more marginal lands in order to feed the growing number of hungry mouths. Unsustainable practices led to environmental damage of one or more of the 8 types just listed, resulting in agriculturally marginal lands having to be abandoned again. Consequences for society included food shortages, starvation, wars among too many people fighting for too few resources, and the overthrow of governing elites by disillusioned masses. Eventually, population decreased through starvation, war, disease, and society lost some of the political, economic, and cultural complexity that had developed at its peak. Writers find it tempting to draw analogies between those trajectories of human societies and the trajectory of individual human lives. To talk of society's birth, growth, peak, sequence, and death is to assume that the long period of sequence that most of us traverse between our peak years and our death also applies to societies. But this metaphor proves erroneous for many past societies, and even those of the modern Soviet Union. They declined rapidly after reaching peak numbers and power. Those rapid declines must have come to a surprise and shock to their citizens. In the worst case of collapse, everybody in the society emigrated or died. Obviously, though, those grim trajectories is not one that all past societies followed unvaryingly to completion. Different societies collapsed at different degrees and in somewhat different ways, while many societies didn't collapse at all. The risk of collapse today is now a matter of increasing concern. Indeed, collapses have already materialized in Somalia, Rwanda, and other third world countries. Many people fear that ecocide has now come to overshadow nuclear war and emerging diseases as a threat to global civilization. The environmental problems facing us today include the same 8 that included or undermined past societies, plus 4 new ones: human-caused climate change, buildup of toxic chemicals in the environment, energy shortages, and full human utilization of the Earth's photosynthetic capacity. Most of these 12 threats, it is claimed, will become globally critical within the next few decades. Either we will solve the problems by then, or the problems will undermine us, just as Somalia, but also the first world societies. Much more likely than a doomsday scenario involves human extinction or an apocalyptic collapse of an industrial civilization would be just a future of significantly lower living standards, chronically higher risks, and the undermining of some of what we consider some of our key values. Such a collapse would assume various forms, such as a worldwide spread of disease, or else wars triggered ultimately by scarcity of environmental resources. If this reasoning is correct, then our efforts today to determine the state of the world in which our current generation of children and young adults live out their middle and late years. So, so this guy is basically analyzing where are we heading, right? And it's no longer just a civilization, right? It's no longer the Mayans, and now because we have the ability to affect the whole planet, right? Are we heading towards a total collapse or some sort of unwinding of civilization? So that's it. I recommend it. I'll leave it if you want to borrow it.